Hi everyone, this is Nia and today we're going to be doodling some citrus fruits. This is super simple, easy, and fun for all levels. And I'm going to start by sketching the different elements so I know how to space them out as I paint. I'd like to begin by placing all the large elements first, which I want them to be the fruit slices like the lime, lemon, and orange. And I'm going to cut them in different ways, circular or wedges. Once I'm done, I'm going to add the additional elements to support the theme. I like to add some oval kumquats and circular ones because I feel like these small shapes are going to be so cute against the larger fruits. And I'm also going to add leaves and flowers or citrus blooms. By the way, if you don't like to draw, I'll have this outline available in my coffee shop so you can trace and get straight to painting. Once I've drawn out the basic shapes, I'm also going to add a bit of form to the slices, adding the sides or a bit of the skin so it doesn't look flat. And to make the divisions easier for the slices, I'm going to lightly indicate the lines so I can paint around them later on. By the way, as I'm sketching, I always want to sketch the outline very lightly. I'm holding my pencil quite far back and loosely. This way, the pencil marks will be light enough so it doesn't go through the transparent color later on. I feel like I have a good amount of elements here, but I can always add or fix things later as I paint. So next, let's go over the colors. Firstly, this is Terre Verte by Holbein, Prussian Blue by Holbein, Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, Vermilion by Holbein, Buff Titanium by Daniel Smith, and Bulletproof White by Dr. P.H. Martins. I'm going to outline this doodle and I'm going to use my colored pencil. This is by Faber Castell and it's just a hobby grade watercolor colored pencils, or you can also use pen or other colored pencils as well. Now let's paint. I'm going to start by painting the lemon slice. For this, I'm going to use Hansa Yellow Medium as the main yellow, but I want to warm up the color slightly, so I added a little bit of vermilion. The color is still mostly yellow, but it's just a little bit deeper and warmer instead of the yellow being a cool color. And I'm just painting the separate juicy parts of the citrus while leaving a little bit of white line in between for the membrane. And while the surface is still damp, I like to use a mixture with a bit more vermilion, so the yellow is a bit deeper, and I like to just dot in some of this richer color for a slight variation in the tone. As I'm painting these individual segments, I like to leave out some white negative space to make it look a bit more juicy. But if this is too difficult and you prefer to just paint the whole thing flat, you can also add extra highlights with the Bulletproof White later on. To make the lemon slice look more organic in shape, I'm also going to round the edges and the tip as well as the ends of those little segments. If any of those segments have completely dried and I feel they dried off too light since I used too much water, I'm just going to layer on the same color on top. As for the rind, I'm going to use a thicker consistency of the same mixture. I'm going to paint on the thick part of the rind that we can see, and I'm also going to outline the overall slice fairly thinly. The next slice will be an orange, and I'm just going to use the same mixture here, but to make it more orange, I just added more vermilion in the mixture. I'm going to treat it in the same way by separating the membranes by leaving white negative space. I'm also going to round all of the edges. Just like the lemon before, I like to make it slightly textured, so you can see me leaving out some white negative space, but it's okay if you forget or you accidentally paint over it, since we can always add more white highlights with Bulletproof White. Sometimes it can be a bit uncomfortable to paint a full circle. Sometimes it's also a bit difficult to visualize, and if this is the case, feel free to rotate your paper or your sketchbook to make the painting process more comfortable for you. Again, for the rind, I'm just going to use the same color mixture but in a slightly thicker consistency. I'm going to treat it the same way as the lemon, painting the rind that we can see more of a bit thickly, and as for the rest of the rind, I'm just going to create a thin outline. The next ones are kumquat slices. Because they're so small, they're only going to be divided into 4 sections, and I'm going to use the same mixture with a ratio that is in between the lemon and the orange we've painted earlier. Next, let's move on to the wedges. I'm going to paint a green lime. At first, I just added Terre Verte to the orangey yellow on my palette. And for the rest, I moved it to another part of my palette and I added more Hansa Yellow and Terre Verte. The reason why I did this is because I want to pick up a little bit of the vermilion from the orange so the green doesn't look too overly bright and saturated. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I'm sure you already noticed from this demonstration, but I prefer to always draw an outline of each section that I'm going to paint and then fill in the rest of the space. This just makes it so much easier so the paint doesn't bleed out in places that I don't want them to go. For the last slice, I'm going to use a deep yellow color that is in between the lemon and the kumquats. So this is just a mixture of Hansa Yellow Medium with some vermilion as well. And this is going to be based off local oranges that I see a lot of in Indonesia. They have deep yellow flesh with lime green to deep green rind. I want the color of the rind to be a bit more muted than the lime. So here I'm using a medium to thick consistency of the lime mixture with added Terre Verte, and I'm going to mute the color by taking some of the green that I mixed with the orange. Next, I want to make sure all the slices are completely dry and I'm going to paint the albedo. I googled this and that's apparently what it's called. This is referring to the white part within the rind. And for these, I just basically use a clean damp brush and paint in between the sections that we've painted according to whichever citrus fruits. And what's going to happen is the damp brush will pick up a little bit of dried paint and I'm going to spread it on the white parts very lightly. This is why it's very important to make sure everything is completely dry. If not, you'll risk smudging a lot of the paint on the white parts. And another important note is if you have any pencil marks showing on those white parts, it's better to erase them beforehand. If not, the pencil marks will be fixed underneath the paint. Once I've painted the albedos, if I feel certain membranes got too smudged, I like to paint over the edges of some of the sections just to redefine them. But while doing this, make sure that the surface is completely dry so your paint doesn't spread. Next, I'm going to paint the oval kumquats. For this, I use a light to medium consistency of the orange that I've already premixed on my palette. I first started with a lighter yellow orange. Then for the shadows, I'm going to use a thicker consistency with added vermilion, and I'm just painting dots so the surface looks a little bit textured on the damp surface. On the corner here, I decided to change the outline. I decided to paint some lemons instead. I feel like as I was painting this, there was a lot of oranges already, and I want to add something yellow, so I decided to add 2 lemons so I can cover this large space. To make the lemons look more natural, I'm going to add some leaves on the branches. And for this first one, I'm going to paint it first because it's going to cover part of the lemon. As for the color, I used the previous green mixture, but I added more Terre Verte and also a little bit of Vermilion. So the color is slightly different to the lime. For the lemon, I'm just going to add more Hansa Yellow to the orangey mix on my palette. So again, just like the slice, the yellow is a bit warmer. I started with a medium consistency and I somewhat twirled my brush and create dots so the surface of the lemon looks slightly textured. For the sides, I added more vermilion into the mix, and along the tips of the lemon, I also added the yellow-green mixture, just dotting it on the damp surface, so it looks like some parts of the lemon are still slightly unripe. I'm going to treat this one the exact same way, but you can see I've left out a little bit of white sliver in between those lemons because the previous lemon hasn't completely dry, and I don't want the color to blend into this one. I'm going to add a cast shadow underneath the leaf so it doesn't look joint, and for the cast shadow I just use the yellow-green in a light consistency to layer on top of the lemon. I want to create a different green for the kumquats, and for this I just added Prussian blue into the previous green mixture. I feel like adding small round fruits would be so cute and a nice addition to the composition. So I don't know what these are, but I kind of just made it up. It's just a circle with little leaves on top and the leaves are rounded. Kind of reminds me of mangosteen actually, but just tiny and orange because of the citrus theme. But I really like how cute they look, and I'm going to just add a few of these around the composition for funsies. For the leaves, I'm going to use the lime green mixture, and for the fruit, I'm just going to color it with an orange mixture. They're so simple to paint, so I'm just going to paint some freehand. And I always like to paint the leaves first, then dry it completely so the orange doesn't get contaminated with the light green. At this point, I feel like I have a pretty good colorful spread, so next I'm going to fill in the empty spaces with citrus blooms. They're generally white, so I'm just going to use buff titanium to paint the flower petals. I like to paint small 5-petaled flowers. Then for the center, I'm going to use a burgundy mixture from Vermilion and Prussian blue. I'm only going to use a medium consistency. You can paint this on the still damp surface and let the burgundy somewhat bloom out into the petals slightly, but you do have to get the right dryness to wetness ratio. As for me, I find it so much easier to dry it off completely, and I just paint on the center with a light consistency so I have a bit more control. After this, I'm going to add an even darker center using the same mixture with added Prussian blue, so it's just a slightly different ratio. I'm going to use a medium consistency to paint dots right at the center so you can see the progression of colors. Now moving on to the stems of the fruits, I'm going to use the dark green mixture as a base and add some vermilion into it so it becomes more of a brown, and I'm going to use a thick consistency and a dry brush load in order to get those really thin brush strokes. Now, as for the awkward empty spaces, I'm going to fill them in by painting some leaves. I'm going to paint them in different ways with different green tones, just by playing with the ratio of the green mixtures. I like to think about different ways they grow. You can also create different leaf shapes, like large long leaves or smaller fern leaves, or basically anything you can think of. Once I'm done with the leaves, I'm going to add some deep yellow dots, and I'm going to play around with the size just to fill in more of the empty spaces. I feel like this adds more of a cutesy vibe as well, and it also makes the overall composition more dynamic and fun. Once I'm done, I'm going to use my colored pencil to add details to the leaves and outline some of the elements if I feel they're a bit too light and need some definition, especially for the light colored flowers and some of the citrus fruits. I personally just like the combination of colored pencils and watercolors because the pencil just gives it this nice texture. But if you don't have colored pencils, you can also use pen. It'll just look slightly different but still cute. For the slices, I still haven't made up my mind whether I want to outline the whole thing. This is completely up to you as well. But after this, once I'm done, I'm going to add some highlights using my bleed proof white, and this will make the fruits look more juicy and shiny. I like to add some very small brush strokes to the fruit slices, aiming outwards or to the center of those segments, and also highlights following the roundness of the fruits to enhance their form. Lastly, I'm going to add dots to the right side of the skin for the lemons just to make them look a bit more textured. And that's basically it for this tutorial. I had so much fun with this one and I hope you learned something new. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider subscribing. The list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!